The moment, Tessa Porter felt the first sharp pains in her lower back. She knew the baby was coming sooner than expected, and the man who had promised to marry her was nowhere to be found at the dusty depot in Rawhide, Wyoming territory. She stood on the wooden platform with her worn carpetbag at her feet, one hand pressed against her swollen belly, and the other shading her eyes from the harsh afternoon sun of August, 1878. The train that had brought her here was already pulling away, black smoke billowing into the cloudless sky as it headed west toward Utah. Michael had said he would meet her here. He had promised in his letters that they would start their new life together in this rough frontier town, where he had supposedly secured a job at the lumber mill. But the platform was nearly empty now, except for an elderly couple loading supplies onto a wagon and a cowboy leaning against a post, his hat pulled low over his eyes. Tessa felt tears stinging her eyes but refused to let them fall. She was 20 years old and had already cried enough tears to last a lifetime. When her father had discovered her condition 3 months ago, he had thrown her out of their Philadelphia home without a second thought. Her mother had wept but done nothing to stop him. Michael had been her only hope, the young clerk who had courted her with sweet words and sweeter promises before he headed west to make his fortune. She had believed him when he said he loved her. She had believed him when he said they would be married as soon as she joined him in Wyoming. Another pain gripped her, stronger this time, and she gasped aloud. The carpetbag slipped from her fingers and hit the platform with a thud. She bent forward slightly, trying to breathe through the discomfort the way she had seen other women do. The baby was not due for another 3 weeks, but apparently the long journey by train had brought on early labor. "Miss, are you all right?" The voice was deep and concerned, and when Tessa looked up, the cowboy who had been leaning against the post was now standing directly in front of her. He was tall, with broad shoulders and sun-weathered skin that spoke of long days working outdoors. His eyes, a striking shade of gray-blue, were filled with genuine worry as he took in her condition. "I am fine," Tessa lied, straightening up with effort. "I am just waiting for someone." The cowboy glanced down the empty street and then back at her. "How long have you been waiting?" "The train arrived about 30 minutes ago." Her voice wavered despite her best efforts to keep it steady. "He should be here any moment." Something in the cowboy's expression shifted, a flicker of understanding followed by something that looked almost like anger, though not directed at her. "Is there somewhere I can take you while you wait? The hotel, perhaps, or the doctor's office?" Tessa shook her head. "I need to wait here." "What if he comes and I am not here? He will not know where to find me." "Miss, I do not mean to be forward, but you look like you need to sit down. At the very least, let me help you into the shade." He gestured toward the depot building where a narrow stretch of shade offered relief from the brutal sun. "My name is Isaac Fisher, and I give you my word as a gentleman that I mean you no harm." There was something in his voice, something honest and kind, that made Tessa want to trust him. And truthfully, she did not think she could stand much longer. Another wave of pain was already building, tightening across her abdomen like an iron band. "Thank you," she whispered. "My name is Tessa Porter." Isaac picked up her carpetbag with one hand and offered his other arm for support. She took it gratefully, feeling the solid strength of him as they walked slowly toward the shade. He helped her sit on a bench against the wall of the depot building, setting her bag down beside her with care. "I will be right back," he said, and before she could protest, he had disappeared into the depot office. He returned a moment later with a cup of water and a folded cloth. "The water is fresh from the well and the cloth is clean. You can use it to cool yourself." Tessa accepted both with trembling hands. She drank deeply, not realizing how thirsty she had been until the cool water touched her lips. Isaac dampened the cloth in what remained of the water and handed it back to her. She pressed it against her forehead and neck, feeling instant relief. "Thank you," she said again. "You are very kind." Isaac settled himself on the edge of the platform nearby, close enough to help if needed but far enough to be respectful. He pulled a pocket watch from his vest and checked the time. "It is just past 2 o'clock. "What time were you supposed to meet your husband?" The word husband made Tessa's throat tighten. "He is not my husband, not yet. He was supposed to meet me when the train arrived at 1:30. Isaac nodded slowly, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. "I see. And you have an address for him?" "A place of work, perhaps." He said he was working at the lumber mill. "His name is Michael Dwyer." Even as she spoke the words, Tessa felt a cold dread settling in her stomach. She had been so certain that Michael would be here. The alternative was too terrible to consider. Isaac stood up abruptly. "Wait here. Do not move. I will be back in less than 20 minutes. "Where are you going?" Tessa called after him, but he was already striding down the street with long, purposeful steps. She watched him disappear around a corner, leaving her alone again with her fears and the growing pains that were coming more frequently now. True to his word, Isaac returned 19 minutes later by Tessa's count. But the expression on his face told her everything she needed to know before he even spoke. Her heart, already heavy, seemed to turn to lead in her chest. "There is no one named Michael Dwyer working at the lumber mill," Isaac said quietly, crouching down in front of her so they were at eye level. "The foreman there said no one by that name has ever worked there. I also checked at the other mill on the north side of town and at the mining office. No one has heard of him." The tears that Tessa had been holding back now spilled freely down her cheeks. "He promised," she whispered. "He said he loved me. He said we would be married." Isaac's expression was a mixture of anger and compassion. "I am sorry, Miss Porter. I truly am. Men like that deserve to answer for what they do." Another contraction seized her, this one strong enough to make her cry out. She doubled over, clutching her belly as the pain radiated through her entire body. When it finally subsided, she was breathing hard and Isaac was holding her hand, his face pale with concern. "Miss Porter, we need to get you to the doctor right now. That baby is coming whether we are ready or not." "I have no money," Tessa gasped. "I spent my last dollars on the train ticket. Michael was supposed to take care of everything." "Do not worry about that now," Isaac said firmly. He scooped her up into his arms as if she weighed nothing at all, carpetbag and all. "The only thing that matters is getting you and this baby through this safely." Tessa wanted to protest, wanted to insist that she could not possibly accept such charity from a stranger, but another contraction was already building, and she could barely think through the pain. She leaned her head against Isaac's solid chest as he carried her down the street, vaguely aware of curious stares from townspeople as they passed. The doctor's office was a small white building on a side street, marked by a simple wooden sign that read Dr. William Moss, Physician. Isaac kicked the door open with his boot and carried Tessa inside, calling out for the doctor. A middle-aged man with graying hair and spectacles appeared from a back room, wiping his hands on a towel. He took one look at Tessa and immediately sprang into action. "Bring her back here, quickly." "How far apart are the pains?" "About 5 minutes," Isaac answered, following the doctor into a small examination room. He laid Tessa gently on the narrow bed, and she immediately curled onto her side as another contraction gripped her. "I need you to wait outside, doctor," Moss told Isaac, already rolling up his sleeves. "I will call you if I need assistance." Isaac hesitated, looking down at Tessa with an expression she could not quite read. Then he nodded and squeezed her hand once before stepping out of the room and closing the door behind him. The next several hours were a blur of pain unlike anything Tessa had ever experienced. Dr. Moss was efficient and kind, but there was only so much he could do to ease the ordeal of childbirth. Night had fallen by the time Tessa finally heard the thin, warbling cry of her baby. She collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted beyond measure, as Dr. Moss wrapped the infant in a clean blanket. "You have a son, Miss Porter," he said with a smile, placing the tiny bundle in her arms. "A healthy boy with good lungs from the sound of it." Tessa looked down at the red-faced infant in her arms and felt her heart crack open in a way she had not expected. This tiny person, this perfect little boy, was hers. He had her dark hair and a determined set to his mouth even in these first moments of life. Despite everything, despite Michael's abandonment and her father's rejection, she could not regret the existence of this child. "Hello, little one," she whispered, touching his soft cheek with one finger. "I am your mama, Doctor." Moss cleaned up and gave her instructions for nursing and care, then left her to rest while he went to speak with Isaac. Tessa could hear the low murmur of their voices through the thin wall, but could not make out the words. She did not know what she was going to do. She had no money, no husband, and now a newborn baby to care for. The enormity of her situation threatened to overwhelm her. A soft knock on the door preceded Dr. Moss's return. Behind him came Isaac, his hat in his hands and an expression of nervous determination on his face. He stopped just inside the doorway, his eyes going first to Tessa and then to the baby in her arms. "May I?" he asked quietly. Tessa nodded, too tired to wonder at his interest. Isaac approached the bed slowly, as if afraid he might startle her or the baby. He looked down at the sleeping infant with something like wonder in his eyes. "He is beautiful," Isaac said softly. "What will you name him?" "I thought I might call him Thomas," Tessa replied. "It was my grandfather's name." Isaac nodded approvingly. Then he took a deep breath and met her eyes directly. "Miss Porter, Dr. Moss has explained your situation to me. I want you to know that I have paid for his services and for a room at the boarding house for the next month. You will have time to recover and figure out your next steps." Tessa felt fresh tears spring to her eyes. "I cannot accept such generosity. I have no way to repay you." "I am not asking for repayment," Isaac said firmly. "I am asking for something else entirely, and I know this is going to sound strange given that we only just met this afternoon. But I would like you to hear me out before you answer." Tessa glanced at Dr. Moss, who gave her an encouraging nod, then looked back at Isaac. "I am listening." Isaac cleared his throat, clearly nervous. "I own a ranch about 8 miles south of town. It is not much yet, just a small house and enough land for a modest herd, but I have been building it up for the past 3 years. I always thought that one day I would have a wife and children to share it with, but that has not worked out the way I hoped." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I was engaged once, about 5 years ago, to a woman named Catherine. We had planned our whole future together, but she took ill with scarlet fever and died before we could be married. Since then, I have not met anyone who made me want to try again. Until today." Tessa's breath caught in her throat. She could not possibly be hearing what she thought she was hearing. Isaac continued, his words coming faster now. "I know this is sudden, and I know you do not know me from Adam, but I am a good man, Miss Porter. I do not drink to excess. I do not gamble, and I have never raised my hand to another person except in self-defense. I own my land free and clear, and I have enough saved to get through lean times. What I am trying to say is that I would like to marry you if you will have me. And I would like to raise your son as my own, with all the rights and protections that entails." The room was silent except for the tiny snuffling sounds Thomas made in his sleep. Tessa stared at Isaac, searching his face for any sign of deception or ulterior motive. But all she saw was earnest sincerity and a deep kindness that seemed to radiate from him. "Why?" she finally asked. "Why would you do this for me, for us?" Isaac's expression softened. "When I saw you standing on that platform today, so clearly alone and in need of help, something in me just knew. I know that probably sounds foolish, but it is the truth. And then when I found out that scoundrel had abandoned you, I got angry. Not at you, but at him, at the unfairness of it all. A woman should not be punished for trusting someone who proved unworthy of that trust. And a child should not suffer for the sins of his father." He knelt down beside the bed so they were at eye level. "I cannot promise you romance or passionate declarations, at least not right away, but I can promise you safety, security, and respect. I can promise that I will work hard to provide for you and Thomas, and that I will treat you both with kindness. And maybe, over time, we could build something real together, something good." Tessa looked down at Thomas, sleeping peacefully in her arms, blissfully unaware of the life-changing decision his mother was about to make. She thought of her empty purse, her ruined reputation, and the harsh realities of trying to survive as an unmarried mother in 1878. But more than that, she thought about the gentle way Isaac had helped her today, the genuine concern in his eyes and the sincerity in his voice now. "If I agree to this," she said slowly, "I need you to understand something. I trusted a man before, and he betrayed that trust completely. I do not know if I can love again, at least not for a long while. I do not want to mislead you or give you false hope." Isaac nodded. "I understand, and I am not asking for your love right away. All I am asking is that you give me a chance to earn your trust. The rest will come in its own time, or it will not. Either way, you and Thomas will have a home and a name, and that is what matters most right now." It was probably the most practical proposal in the history of proposals, and yet something about it touched Tessa deeply. There was no false flattery, no empty promises of eternal devotion, just an honest offer of partnership from a man who seemed genuinely good. "Then yes," she heard herself say, "I will marry you, Mr. Fisher." A smile broke across Isaac's face, transforming it from merely handsome to something approaching beautiful. "Isaac, please, if we are going to be married, we should use first names." "Isaac," Tessa repeated, testing the name on her tongue, "and you must call me Tessa." "Tessa," Isaac said softly, as if savoring the sound. Then he reached out and gently touched Thomas's tiny hand. The baby's fingers curled reflexively around Isaac's large, calloused finger, and Tessa saw something shift in Isaac's expression. It was wonder mixed with a fierce protectiveness that made her throat tighten with emotion. Dr. Moss, who had been watching this entire exchange with a pleased expression, cleared his throat. "Well, I think this calls for congratulations. Isaac, you are a good man for stepping up like this. Tessa, you are getting one of the finest men in Rawhide, and that is the truth. Now, if you are serious about getting married, I suggest you do it sooner rather than later, for the baby's sake, if nothing else." "Tomorrow," Isaac said decisively. "I will make arrangements with Pastor Reynolds tonight. Tessa needs to rest, but if she is feeling well enough tomorrow afternoon, we can have a simple ceremony at the church." Tessa nodded, feeling as if she were caught in a strange dream. Just this morning, she had been on the train, nervous but hopeful about reuniting with Michael. Now, less than 12 hours later, she was a mother and about to become a wife to a man she had only just met. It was overwhelming and terrifying, but there was also something oddly right about it. "I should let you rest," Isaac said, standing up. "Dr. Moss says you and Thomas can stay here tonight, and then tomorrow I will take you to the boarding house after the ceremony. I will have your room ready and some supplies laid in. Is there anything specific you need?" clothes for the baby, or anything else. Tessa thought of her nearly empty carpet bag. She had brought so little with her from Philadelphia, thinking that Michael would provide everything. I have a few things for the baby, but I will need more, and I am afraid my own clothes are rather worn. Make a list, Isaac said gently. I will see what I can do. The general store stays open late on Fridays, and Mrs. Henderson, who runs it, is always happy to help outfit a new mother. After Isaac left, with promises to return in the morning, Dr. Moss helped Tessa get settled for the night. He showed her how to nurse Thomas, which proved more difficult than she had anticipated, but eventually they both got the hang of it. As she lay in the narrow bed with her son curled against her chest, Tessa allowed herself to feel a tiny spark of hope. Maybe everything would be all right after all. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Tessa woke to find Thomas fussing for his breakfast and her body aching in places she had not known could ache. Dr. Moss checked on them both, declared them healthy enough to leave his care, and even produced a simple blue dress that his late wife had worn, carefully preserved in a trunk. She would have wanted you to have it, he said kindly when Tessa protested. She was about your size, and it seems fitting for a wedding day. The dress was beautiful, a soft blue cotton with delicate white buttons down the front and lace at the collar and cuffs. Tessa changed into it with the doctor's housekeeper's help, marveling at how something so simple could make her feel almost pretty again, despite her exhaustion and the ordeal she had been through. Isaac arrived at noon, freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt and vest that Tessa suspected he reserved for special occasions. His eyes widened when he saw her in the blue dress, and a slow smile spread across his face. "You look lovely," he said, and the sincerity in his voice made Tessa blush. "Thank you," she replied, "and thank you for arranging all of this. I know it cannot be easy." "It is the easiest decision I have made in years," Isaac said simply. He held out his arm. "Shall we? Pastor Reynolds is expecting us, and I have a couple of witnesses waiting at the church." Tessa bundled Thomas in the blanket Dr. Moss had provided and took Isaac's arm. They walked slowly through the streets of Rawhide, drawing curious looks from townspeople who undoubtedly wondered about the stranger in their midst. The church was a small wooden structure at the end of Main Street, white painted and simple, with a cross mounted above the door. Inside they found Pastor Reynolds, a round man with kind eyes and a gentle smile, along with two witnesses who Isaac introduced as his ranch hands, Pete and Samuel. Both men were younger than Isaac, probably in their early 20s, and they greeted Tessa with shy nods and mumbled congratulations. The ceremony itself was brief and simple. Tessa held Thomas throughout, and when it came time to exchange vows, Isaac's voice was steady and sure as he promised to love, honor, and cherish her for as long as they both lived. Tessa's own voice trembled a bit, but she got through her vows without faltering, and just like that, she was married. Isaac had borrowed a wagon for the occasion, outfitted with blankets and pillows to make the ride more comfortable. He helped Tessa up onto the seat, handed up Thomas, and then climbed up beside her. Pete and Samuel rode ahead on horseback, leading the way out of town and south along a well-worn trail. The landscape around them was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way. Rolling hills covered in brown grass stretched to the horizon, broken up by rocky outcroppings, and the occasional stand of cottonwood trees marking a creek or spring. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still touched with snow even in late summer. The sky overhead was impossibly blue and vast, making Tessa feel very small and insignificant. "It is different from Philadelphia, I imagine," Isaac said, watching her take it all in. "Very different," Tessa agreed, "but beautiful in its own way." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the creaking of the wagon and the steady clip-clop of the horses' hooves. Thomas dozed in Tessa's arms, worn out from the excitement of his first full day of life. After about an hour, they crested a rise and Tessa got her first glimpse of the ranch that would be her new home. It was modest, as Isaac had warned, but there was something appealing about it nonetheless. The house was a simple one-story structure made of logs, with a covered porch across the front and a stone chimney at one end. Beyond it stood a barn and several smaller outbuildings, all well-maintained and orderly. A split-rail fence enclosed a pasture where a small herd of cattle grazed, and she could hear the sound of water from somewhere nearby. "It is not much," Isaac said, a note of apology in his voice. "But it is solid and well-built, and there is room to grow." "It is wonderful," Tessa said honestly. After the uncertainty and fear of the past day, the little ranch looked like a haven of safety and peace. Isaac helped her down from the wagon, taking extra care with her and the baby. Pete and Samuel had already dismounted and were heading toward the barn with the horses. Isaac led Tessa up onto the porch and opened the front door, then surprised her by scooping her into his arms, Thomas and all. "Tradition," he said with a slight smile, carrying them both over the threshold. The interior of the house was simple but clean and surprisingly comfortable. The main room served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting room all in one, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall. A sturdy table and chairs stood near the kitchen area, and a pair of well-worn armchairs faced the fireplace. Colorful rag rugs covered the plank floor, and white curtains hung at the windows. Isaac set Tessa down gently and gestured toward a door on the far wall. "That is the bedroom. It is not large, but it has a good bed and plenty of space for Thomas's cradle. I set it up last night after I left Dr. Moss's office." Tessa walked into the bedroom, surprised by what she found. The room was indeed small, but it had clearly been prepared with care. The bed was large and covered with a beautiful quilt in shades of blue and cream. A dresser stood against one wall, and near the window was a wooden cradle that looked newly made, with soft blankets already arranged inside. "You made this?" Tessa asked, running her hand along the smooth wood of the cradle. Isaac nodded, looking slightly embarrassed. "I have been working on it for the past few weeks. I had thought I might need it someday, and then when I met you yesterday, well, it seemed like the right time to finish it." The thought of Isaac staying up late to complete the cradle for a child that was not even his by blood touched Tessa deeply. She turned to look at him, really look at him, trying to understand this man she had married. His face was weathered and strong, with lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often. There was a solidness about him, a reliability that made her feel safe in a way she had not felt in months. "You have been so kind to us," she said softly. "I do not know how to thank you." "You do not need to thank me," Isaac replied. "We are family now. That is what families do for each other." Family. The word echoed in Tessa's mind as she laid Thomas in the cradle and watched him sleep. She had lost her family when her father cast her out, had believed she would have a new family with Michael, and instead had found herself completely alone. And now, through a twist of fate, she had a family again. A husband who had married her out of kindness, and a home where she and her son would be safe. It was not the romantic love story she had once dreamed of, but perhaps it was something better, something real and solid and dependable. The first weeks of married life passed in a blur of adjustment and learning. Tessa was still recovering from childbirth, and caring for a newborn left her exhausted most of the time. But Isaac was endlessly patient and helpful in ways that surprised her. He had clearly done his research, because he knew how to prepare simple meals and keep the house running smoothly when Tessa was too tired to manage. He also proved to be remarkably good with Thomas. Every morning before heading out to work on the ranch, Isaac would spend a few minutes talking to the baby, his deep voice gentle as he told Thomas about the day ahead. And in the evenings, he would hold the infant against his chest, pacing the room when Thomas was fussy, humming tuneless songs until the baby settled. Tessa found herself watching these interactions with a mixture of wonder and guilt. Isaac was being a better father to Thomas than Michael could ever have been, and yet she still felt like she had somehow trapped him into this life. She said as much one evening as they sat together after dinner, Thomas asleep in his cradle nearby. "You do not need to worry about that," Isaac said firmly, setting down the harness he had been mending. "I went into this with my eyes wide open, Tessa. No one forced me to propose to you. I did it because I wanted to, because it felt like the right thing to do. And I have not regretted it for a single moment." "But you did not sign up to raise another man's child," Tessa protested. "You deserve to have a family of your own, children of your own blood." Isaac was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. "I told you about Catherine, my fiancé who died. What I did not tell you is that she was with child when she passed. I did not know until after she was gone when her mother told me. She was only a few months along, too early for anyone else to know." He paused, his voice rough with old grief. "So I lost not just the woman I loved, but also the child we had made together. For a long time after that, I thought I would never have a family. I threw myself into building this ranch, telling myself that work was enough, that I did not need anything else. But I was lying to myself. I wanted a family, I wanted to be a father." He looked at Tessa with an intensity that took her breath away. "So when I see Thomas, I do not see another man's child. I see my son. The son I chose, the son I am raising, the son I will love and protect with everything I have. Blood does not make a family, Tessa. Love and commitment do, and I am committed to you and Thomas for as long as I draw breath." Tessa felt tears streaming down her face, moved beyond words by Isaac's declaration. She reached across the space between their chairs and took his hand. It was rough and calloused from years of hard work, but it was also warm and strong and solid. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Isaac squeezed her hand gently, then released it and went back to mending his harness. But something had shifted between them in that moment, some invisible wall beginning to crumble. Tessa found herself noticing little things about Isaac that she had overlooked before, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the careful way he handled fragile things, the quiet competence with which he managed the ranch and everything on it. As Thomas grew from a tiny newborn into a more robust infant, Tessa regained her strength and began taking on more of the household duties. She discovered that she enjoyed cooking, experimenting with the simple ingredients available to create hearty meals that Isaac praised generously. She learned to make bread from the sourdough starter that Isaac had been maintaining for years, and the smell of fresh baked loaves filled the house on baking days. She also began to venture outside more, exploring the immediate area around the ranch house. There was a vegetable garden behind the house that had been neglected, and Tessa set about reviving it, planting late-season crops that might still have time to mature before the frost. Isaac helped her when he could, digging and hauling water, always careful not to let her overexert herself. One evening in early September, they were working together in the garden while Thomas lay on a blanket nearby, watching the clouds drift overhead. Tessa was on her knees pulling weeds when Isaac suddenly spoke. "You are happy here, are you not?" he asked, a note of uncertainty in his voice. "I mean, I know this is not what you planned for your life, but I hope you are not entirely miserable." Tessa sat back on her heels and looked at him, really looked at him. His face was streaked with dirt, his hair falling into his eyes, and there was genuine concern in his expression. This man who had taken her in when she had nowhere else to go, who had given her his name and his protection, who called another man's child his son. How could she explain to him that she was more than just not miserable? "I am happy," she said, and realized as she spoke the words that they were true. "Happier than I have been in a very long time. You have given me and Thomas a real home, Isaac. Not just a house, but a home. A place where we belong and where we are wanted. That is more than I ever dared hope for." Isaac's face lit up with a smile that transformed his entire countenance. "Good," he said simply. "That is very good." That night, after Thomas was asleep and they were preparing for bed, Isaac hesitated outside the bedroom door. Since their marriage, he had been sleeping in the barn, giving Tessa complete privacy. But now he cleared his throat awkwardly and said, "Tessa, I have been thinking. It is getting colder at night now and winter is coming. It does not make much sense for me to keep sleeping in the barn when there is a perfectly good bed here." Tessa felt her face grow warm, but she nodded. "You are right. This is your house, your bed. I am the one who should have been sleeping elsewhere." "No," Isaac said quickly. "That is not what I meant. I just thought, we are married after all, and it seems silly to pretend otherwise. But I want you to know that I will not pressure you into anything you are not comfortable with. I can make a pallet on the floor, or we can put a blanket down the middle of the bed if that would make you feel more at ease." His earnestness was endearing, and Tessa found herself smiling despite her nervousness. "I think we can manage to share a bed without a blanket wall between us," she said. "We are both adults, and as you said, we are married." So that night, for the first time, they shared the big bed. Isaac stayed carefully on his side and Tessa on hers, with a good foot of space between them. But somehow, knowing he was there, hearing his steady breathing in the darkness, made Tessa feel safer than she had in months. And when Thomas woke crying in the night, Isaac was the one who got up first, scooping the baby from his cradle and bringing him to Tessa, so she could nurse him without having to leave the warmth of the bed. The weeks turned into months, and autumn painted the Wyoming landscape in shades of gold and rust. The cattle were brought down from the high pastures, and Isaac spent long days preparing the ranch for winter. Tessa helped where she could, preserving vegetables from the garden and putting up stores of food for the cold months ahead. Thomas was growing rapidly, becoming more alert and responsive with each passing day. He had started smiling, much to everyone's delight, and Isaac could spend hours making faces at the baby just to earn one of those gummy grins. Watching them together, Tessa often felt her heart swell with an emotion she was afraid to name. One afternoon in late October, Tessa was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when she heard the sound of approaching horses. She tensed, still not entirely comfortable with unexpected visitors. Isaac emerged from the barn at the same time, wiping his hands on his pants as he walked toward the front of the house. 3 riders appeared over the rise, and Tessa recognized Pete and Samuel, along with a third man she did not know. They all looked serious, and a cold finger of dread traced down her spine. Isaac spoke with them for several minutes, his expression growing increasingly grave, before the 3 men rode off again. "What is wrong?" Tessa asked as Isaac walked back toward her. Isaac ran a hand through his hair, clearly troubled. "There have been reports of cattle rustlers in the area. Several ranches have lost stock over the past couple of weeks. Pete heard in town that they might be heading this way." Fear clutched at Tessa's heart. "What does that mean?" "Are we in danger?" "I do not think so," Isaac said, but he did not sound entirely convinced. Rustlers are usually only interested in the cattle, not the people. But I want you to be careful. Stay close to the house, and if you see any strangers around, get inside immediately and bar the door." That night, Isaac cleaned his rifle and set it beside the bed, within easy reach. Tessa tried not to think about what it meant that he felt the need to do so. She held Thomas close as they lay in bed, listening to every creak and rustle outside. "It will be all right," Isaac murmured in the darkness, his hand finding hers and squeezing gently. "I will not let anything happen to you or Thomas. I promise." The next few days passed without incident, and Tessa began to relax a bit. Maybe the rustlers had moved on, or maybe they had been caught. But then, 3 nights later, she woke to the sound of cattle lowing in distress and men shouting in the distance. Isaac was already out of bed, pulling on his boots and grabbing his rifle. "Stay inside," he commanded, his voice urgent. "Bar the door behind me and do not open it for anyone except me or Pete or Samuel. Do you understand?" Tessa nodded, her heart pounding so hard she could barely breathe. Isaac kissed her forehead quickly, then disappeared out the door. She heard his footsteps pounding across the porch, and then he was gone into the night. The next hour was the longest of Tessa's life. She sat in the rocking chair with Thomas clutched to her chest, straining to hear what was happening outside. There were shouts and gunshots, the sound of galloping horses and more cattle in distress. She prayed harder than she had ever prayed before, begging God to keep Isaac safe and to protect them all. Finally, when the sky was just beginning to lighten with the approach of dawn, she heard boots on the porch and Isaac's voice calling her name. She rushed to unbolt the door and threw it open. Isaac stood there, disheveled and dirty, but apparently unharmed. Behind him, she could see Pete and Samuel leading their horses toward the barn. "Are you hurt?" Tessa demanded, running her hands over Isaac's arms and chest, checking for injuries. "I am fine," Isaac assured her, catching her hands and holding them still. "We managed to scare them off before they got away with more than a couple of head. Pete winged one of them, so maybe they will think twice before trying again." Relief flooded through Tessa so powerfully that her knees nearly buckled. Isaac caught her, pulling her and Thomas into his arms and holding them close. Tessa pressed her face against his chest, feeling the solid thump of his heart beneath her cheek. "I was so worried," she whispered. "I thought something might happen to you, and I realized I could not bear it." Isaac pulled back just enough to look down at her, something shifting in his expression. "Tessa," he said softly, his voice rough with emotion, "I need to tell you something. I know we agreed that this marriage would be practical, that we would not expect romance or passion. But I cannot keep pretending that is enough for me anymore." Tessa's breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean?" "I mean I have fallen in love with you," Isaac said, the words tumbling out now as if he could not hold them back any longer. "I think I started falling for you that very first day at the depot, when you were so scared but trying so hard to be brave. And every day since then, I have fallen a little more. The way you care for Thomas, the way you have made this house a home, the way you smile when you think no one is watching. I love everything about you, Tessa. And I understand if you do not feel the same way I do. I will never pressure you or make you uncomfortable. But I needed you to know, especially after tonight when I realized how much I have to lose." Tessa stared up at him, her mind reeling. When had her feelings for Isaac changed from gratitude to something deeper? Was it when he had first held Thomas and looked at him with such tenderness? Was it the night he had shared his story about Catherine and the child he had lost? Or had it been a gradual process, so subtle that she had not even noticed it happening? "I was so frightened tonight," she said slowly, working through her thoughts even as she spoke them. "Not just frightened in general, but frightened for you specifically. And I realized that somewhere along the way, You have become essential to me, not just as a provider or protector, but as a person I care about deeply. As someone I want to share my life with, not just because of convenience or necessity, but because I choose you." She reached up and cupped his face with her free hand. Thomas nestled between them. "I think I am falling in love with you too, Isaac. Maybe I already have fallen and just did not want to admit it to myself. I was so hurt by Michael, so afraid of trusting again. But you have shown me every single day that you are nothing like him. You are good and kind and honorable, and I would be proud to truly be your wife in every sense of the word." The smile that spread across Isaac's face was like the sun rising. He leaned down slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away if she wanted to, and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that was gentle and sweet and full of promise. Thomas squirmed between them, making a small sound of protest at being squished, and they broke apart with breathless laughter. "I think someone wants our attention," Isaac said, looking down at the baby with absolute adoration. "He probably needs to be fed," Tessa agreed. "But Isaac, tonight after he is asleep, can we talk more? About us, about the future?" "I would like that very much," Isaac said softly. The rest of that day passed in a haze of exhaustion and quiet joy. Isaac and the ranch hands assessed the damage from the night's raid and determined that they had lost only 2 cows, far less than it could have been. Word spread through the neighboring ranches, and by afternoon, several of the other ranchers had stopped by to share information and coordinate a response if the rustlers returned. That evening, after Thomas had been fed and changed and sung to sleep, Tessa and Isaac sat together on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. It was chilly, and Isaac had draped a blanket around Tessa's shoulders, then left his arm there, holding her close against his side. "Tell me about your life before you came west," Tessa said. "You know my story, but I realize I know very little about yours." Isaac was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "I grew up in Ohio on a small farm. My father died when I was 15, and I had to step up to help my mother and younger sisters. We managed for a few years, but then my mother got sick and passed, and my sisters went to live with our aunt in Cincinnati. I stayed and worked the farm for another year, but my heart was not in it. So I sold the land, gave most of the money to my sisters for their futures, and headed west." "That must have been hard," Tessa said softly, imagining a young Isaac leaving behind everything he knew. "It was," Isaac admitted, "but it was also necessary. I needed to find my own way to build something that was mine. I worked on other people's ranches for a few years, learning everything I could, and then I found this land. It was cheap, because the previous owner had been killed by a mountain lion, and people thought the place was cursed. But I did not believe in curses, so I bought it and set about making it profitable." "And Catherine," Tessa asked gently, "where did she fit into all this? I met her in town at a church social." "She was the school teacher, newly arrived from back east, and she was the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. Not just physically, though she was lovely, but in her spirit. She was kind and smart and funny, and she did not mind that I was just a struggling rancher. We courted for about 6 months before I asked her to marry me." His voice dropped, thick with old pain. "She said yes, and we set a date for the following spring. But then the fever came through town that winter, and she was one of the ones who did not make it. I sat by her bedside for 3 days, but there was nothing I could do. She died holding my hand, and part of me died with her." Tessa turned in his arms and wrapped her own around him, offering what comfort she could. "I am so sorry, Isaac. I cannot imagine how painful that must have been." "It was the worst thing I have ever experienced," Isaac said. "For a long time, I thought I would never recover from it. But time passed, and the pain gradually faded from unbearable to just a dull ache. And I threw myself into the ranch, determined to build something that would have made Catherine proud. He tightened his arms around Tessa. But I was lonely, terribly lonely, and I think that is why meeting you affected me so strongly. You were vulnerable and in need of help, yes, but you were also brave and determined and so clearly devoted to your child. And I found myself wanting to be part of that, to be part of a family again. I am glad you were there that day, Tessa said. I do not know what would have become of Thomas and me if you had not been. We probably would have ended up in some charity home or worse. You saved us, Isaac. No, Isaac said firmly. We saved each other. You gave me a reason to hope again, a reason to believe that I could have the family I had always wanted. That is a gift beyond price, Tessa. They sat together in comfortable silence for a while, wrapped in each other's arms and the blanket, watching the stars wheel slowly overhead. Tessa felt a contentment she had never experienced before, a sense of being exactly where she was meant to be. Isaac, she said eventually, when we go inside tonight, I do not want there to be any more space between us in that bed. I want to be close to you, as close as a wife should be to her husband. She felt Isaac's sharp intake of breath, felt the way his arms tightened around her. Are you certain? He asked, his voice husky. I do not want you to feel obligated. I am certain, Tessa said, turning to look up at him. I want to be your wife in truth, not just on paper. I want us to be a real family, you and me and Thomas. And maybe, someday, brothers or sisters for Thomas. Isaac cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs stroking gently across her cheekbones. I want that too, he said. More than I can possibly express. He kissed her then, deeper and more passionately than before, and Tessa responded with equal fervor, pouring all her newfound feelings into the kiss. When they finally went inside, Thomas was still sleeping soundly in his cradle. Isaac checked the door to make sure it was barred, then took Tessa's hand and led her to their bed. What followed was tender and sweet, a joining not just of bodies but of hearts and souls. And afterward, as they lay tangled together beneath the quilts, Tessa knew with absolute certainty that this was where she belonged. The winter came on hard that year, with snow piling up in drifts around the ranch house and temperatures dropping far below freezing. But inside, the house was warm and full of love. Thomas continued to grow, becoming more active and alert with each passing week. He started reaching for things, babbling in his own baby language and recognizing Isaac and Tessa when they came into view. Isaac was absolutely devoted to the child. He would spend hours playing with Thomas, making the baby laugh with silly faces and gentle tickles. He built a small wooden rattle and a set of blocks, sanding them smooth so there would be no splinters. And he never, not once, referred to Thomas as anything other than our son or my boy. Tessa watched these interactions with a full heart, falling more in love with her husband every day. Isaac was everything Michael had never been and never could have been. He was present and attentive, working hard to provide for their small family while never neglecting to show them affection and care. On a particularly cold January evening, they were sitting by the fire after dinner when Isaac suddenly said, I have been thinking about Thomas's future. Tessa looked up from her mending, curious. What about it? Well, he is going to need proper schooling eventually. There is a school in town, but it is a long way for a child to travel every day, especially in winter. I was thinking that maybe we should talk about moving closer to town when he is old enough to start learning his letters. You would give up the ranch? Tessa asked, surprised. No, not give it up. But maybe build a small house in town where you and the children could stay during the school year, and I could ride back and forth. Or maybe by then, we will be prosperous enough to hire a proper foreman to help manage things. Children, Tessa repeated, seizing on the plural. You think there will be more? Isaac looked at her with such tenderness that it took her breath away. I hope so. If you want them. I know carrying a child and giving birth is hard on a woman's body, and I would never want to put you through more than you are willing to endure. But I would love to have more children with you, Tessa. A whole houseful, if we are blessed. Tessa set down her mending and crossed to where Isaac sat, settling herself on his lap. I would like that too, she said softly. I always wanted a big family, brothers and sisters for Thomas to grow up with. And I think you would make an excellent father to as many children as we might have. Isaac smiled and kissed her, and one thing led to another until they found themselves in their bed, losing themselves in each other once again. And later, as Tessa drifted off to sleep in Isaac's arms, she sent up a silent prayer of thanks for the unexpected blessings that had come from that terrible day at the depot. Spring came eventually, as it always does, melting the snow and turning the brown grass green again. The cattle grew fat on the new growth, and the ranch began to show a profit beyond just sustaining itself. Isaac was able to hire another hand, a young man named Johnny who had recently arrived in Wyoming from Texas. With the extra help, Isaac had more time to spend around the house, and he used much of it playing with Thomas, who was now sitting up on his own and showing signs that he would soon be crawling. The baby's personality was emerging too. He was generally happy and easygoing, but he had a stubborn streak that made both Tessa and Isaac laugh. One warm afternoon in May, Tessa was working in the garden when she felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. She sat down quickly on the edge of the raised bed, taking deep breaths until the feeling passed. It was not the first time she had felt odd recently. Her monthly courses had not come for 2 months now, and she had been feeling queasy in the mornings. She knew what these signs meant, of course. She had experienced them before with Thomas. But this time was different. This time she was not afraid. This time, she was surrounded by love and security, with a husband who wanted more children and would welcome this news with joy. That evening, as they were preparing for bed, Tessa decided to tell Isaac. I have something to share with you, she said, sitting on the edge of the bed and taking his hands. Isaac looked concerned. What is it? Are you all right? I am fine, Tessa assured him quickly. Better than fine, actually. Isaac, I am with child. I am fairly certain of it. For a moment, Isaac just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then his face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen. Truly, we are going to have a baby. Truly, Tessa confirmed, laughing as Isaac swept her up into his arms and spun her around. A baby, Isaac repeated, setting her down carefully as if she were made of glass. Our baby. Thomas is going to be a big brother. He knelt down and pressed his ear against her still flat belly, as if he could hear something. Hello in there, little one. I am your father, and I already love you more than you could possibly know. Tessa ran her fingers through Isaac's hair, her heart so full she thought it might burst. This was what family felt like. This was what love felt like. Not the dramatic, fleeting passion she had felt for Michael, but something deeper and more enduring. A love built on respect and partnership, on shared goals and mutual support. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, unlike her first one, which had been shadowed by fear and uncertainty. Isaac was attentive, but not overbearing, helping with the heavier work around the house and making sure Tessa got plenty of rest. Thomas, now crawling everywhere and pulling himself up on furniture, kept them both entertained with his antics. Summer turned to autumn, and Tessa's belly grew round and full. This time, Dr. Moss came out to the ranch to check on her, declaring both mother and baby healthy and thriving. You are doing wonderfully, Mrs. Fisher, he said with approval. Whatever you are doing, keep doing it. What she was doing, Tessa thought, was being loved, being cherished and cared for in a way she had never experienced before, and that made all the difference. In early November, on a cold but clear day, Tessa went into labor. Isaac had been prepared for this moment for weeks, and he immediately sent Johnny riding for Dr. Moss while he stayed with Tessa, holding her hand and murmuring encouragement as the contractions came and went. This birth was easier than Thomas's had been, perhaps because Tessa's body knew what to do this time, or perhaps because she was not terrified and alone. Just after sunset, with Isaac holding one hand and Dr. Moss coaching her through the final pushes, Tessa delivered a healthy baby girl. "A daughter," Isaac breathed, tears streaming down his face as Dr. Moss placed the tiny, squalling infant in his arms. "We have a daughter, Tessa." Tessa, exhausted but elated, reached out to touch the baby's tiny hand. The infant had a shock of dark hair like both Thomas and Tessa, but her eyes, when they fluttered open, were the same gray-blue as Isaac's. "She looks like you," Tessa said softly. "She is perfect," Isaac said, bringing the baby over to the bed so Tessa could hold her. "What should we name her?" They had discussed names during the pregnancy, but had not settled on anything definite. Now, looking at their daughter's tiny, perfect face, one name seemed to rise above all the others. "Catherine," Tessa said. "If that is all right with you. I think your first love would be honored to have this little one named after her." Isaac's eyes filled with fresh tears and he nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Finally, he managed, "Thank you. That is perfect. Catherine Rose Fisher." "Where is Rose from?" Tessa asked with a smile. "Your middle name," Isaac said. "I remember you told me once when we were first getting to know each other." The fact that he had remembered such a small detail touched Tessa deeply. She looked down at little Catherine, who had stopped crying and was now looking around with unfocused newborn eyes, and felt a profound sense of peace. Thomas, who had been staying with Pete in the barn during the birth, was brought in to meet his new sister. At 14 months old, he was walking confidently now and chattering away in a mixture of real words and baby babble. Isaac scooped him up and brought him close to the bed so he could see the baby. "Thomas, this is your sister Catherine," Isaac said gently. "You are going to help us take care of her, right?" Thomas looked at the baby with serious curiosity, then reached out one chubby hand to touch her face. "Baby," he said clearly, one of his favorite new words. "That is right, baby," Tessa confirmed. "Your baby sister." Over the following weeks, the household adjusted to having a newborn again. Catherine proved to be an easier baby than Thomas had been, sleeping longer stretches at night and generally content when she was awake. Thomas was fascinated by his sister, often bringing his toys to show her even though she was far too young to appreciate them. Isaac was just as besotted with Catherine as he was with Thomas, spending hours holding her and talking to her about the ranch and everything she would learn as she grew up. Watching him with both children, no one would ever guess that Thomas was not his biological child. He loved them both equally and completely, and they adored him in return. That winter was another harsh one, but the Fisher family stayed warm and happy in their little house. Isaac had done well with the ranch, and they had enough money saved now to hire a proper foreman for the following year. True to his word about Thomas's education, Isaac began making plans to build a small house in Rawhide where Tessa and the children could stay during the school term once Thomas was old enough. But that was still a few years off. For now, they were content to be together, to watch the children grow, and to build their life together one day at a time. One evening in early spring, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset while the children played at their feet, Tessa turned to Isaac and said, "Do you ever think about that day at the depot, about how differently things could have turned out? Isaac was quiet for a moment, then nodded. I do. I think about how close I came to just riding past without stopping. I had been in town to pick up supplies and I was tired and ready to get home. But something made me pause, made me look over at the depot one more time. And there you were. I am glad you paused, Tessa said softly. I am glad you saw me and decided to help. I am glad I asked you to marry me, Isaac added. It was the craziest, most impulsive thing I have ever done, but it was also the best decision of my life. Tessa leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. Mine too. You saved me that day, Isaac. You saved both of us. But more than that, you gave us a real home, a real family. You gave us love. Isaac kissed the top of her head. And you gave me a reason to live again. After Catherine died, I was just going through the motions. But you and the children, you brought joy back into my life. You made this house a home and this ranch more than just a place to work. You made it all worthwhile. They sat together in comfortable silence, as the sky turned from gold to pink to deep purple, the stars beginning to emerge overhead. Thomas had tired himself out playing and was dozing against Isaac's leg, while Catherine slept in Tessa's arms. It was a perfect moment, one of many they had shared over the past year and a half. Time continued its steady march forward. Thomas grew into an energetic toddler with an insatiable curiosity about everything around him. Catherine developed into a happy, smiley baby who laughed at everything her big brother did. And Tessa and Isaac's love deepened with each passing day, maturing from the tentative beginnings of their marriage into something solid and unshakable. In the spring of 1880, when Thomas was almost 2 and Catherine was 6 months old, Isaac made good on his promise to expand their house. With the help of Pete, Samuel, and Johnny, he added 2 new bedrooms and enlarged the main living area. Now Thomas had his own small room and there was a proper nursery for Catherine. We will need the space, Isaac said with a meaningful look at Tessa when the construction was finished. Oh, Tessa asked, though she knew exactly what he was implying. And why is that? Because I intend for us to have a full house, Isaac said, pulling her into his arms. At least 4 or 5 children, I think, maybe more if we are blessed. Tessa laughed and kissed him. Well then, I suppose we had better get to work on that. Sure enough, by the time Catherine was walking and Thomas was starting to speak in full sentences, Tessa found herself expecting again. This pregnancy was different from the previous 2, harder on her body and marked by more discomfort. Dr. Moss came out regularly to check on her, and finally in late autumn of 1881 she delivered twin boys. Isaac was beside himself with joy, pacing the bedroom with a baby in each arm while Tessa rested. 2 boys, he kept saying. 2 healthy boys, Samuel and Matthew Fisher. The names were ones they had chosen together, both from the Bible but with no particular family connection. The twins were identical, with the same dark hair as their siblings and Isaac's eyes. Even from birth, they had distinct personalities. Samuel was quiet and observant, while Matthew was more vocal, letting his needs be known with loud cries. With 4 children under 4 years old, life on the ranch became busy and chaotic in the best possible way. Isaac hired more help, including a woman from town named Mrs. Murphy, who came 3 times a week to help with the laundry and heavy cleaning. Tessa spent her days chasing after Thomas, who was now fully mobile and into everything, caring for Catherine, who was becoming more independent by the day, and managing the twins who demanded constant attention. But despite the exhaustion and occasional frustration, Tessa had never been happier. This was the life she had always dreamed of, the big, loving family she had imagined as a girl. And Isaac was everything a husband and father should be, patient and loving, and always willing to help with whatever needed doing. The years rolled by in a blur of childhood milestones and seasonal changes. Thomas started school in town when he turned 6, staying with the family in the small house Isaac had built for that purpose. Catherine joined him when she turned 6, and the twins followed a few years later. During the school year, Isaac would ride into town several times a week to see his family and handle business, then return to the ranch. But summers and holidays, they were all together at the ranch, and those were Tessa's favorite times. In 1885, when Thomas was 7, Catherine 5, and the twins 4, Tessa gave birth to another daughter whom they named Grace. And 2 years later their last child was born, a boy they named Daniel. 6 children in all, a houseful just as Isaac had wanted. Thomas grew into a responsible young man who took after Isaac in his love for the ranch and his quiet strength. He was protective of his younger siblings and always willing to help with whatever needed doing. Catherine was spirited and smart, often getting into mischief, but with such charm that it was hard to stay angry with her. The twins were inseparable, finishing each other's sentences and always getting into scrapes together. Grace was gentle and artistic, spending hours drawing and creating things. And Daniel, the baby, was spoiled by his older siblings, but somehow remained sweet-natured and kind. The years were not without challenges. There were crop failures and cattle diseases, harsh winters and financial setbacks. But Isaac and Tessa faced each challenge together, supporting each other through difficult times and celebrating together when things went well. Their love, which had begun as a practical arrangement, had grown into something powerful and enduring, a partnership in every sense of the word. One evening in the summer of 1893, when Thomas was 15 and preparing to take on more responsibility at the ranch, and Daniel was just beginning to walk, Tessa and Isaac found themselves alone on the porch for a rare, quiet moment. The children were all in bed, the ranch hands had retired to the bunkhouse, and the world was peaceful. 15 years, Isaac said, shaking his head in wonder. It has been 15 years since that day at the depot. The best 15 years of my life, Tessa said, taking his hand. At 35, she had some silver threads in her dark hair and laugh lines around her eyes, but Isaac still looked at her as if she were the most beautiful woman in the world. Mine too, Isaac agreed. He was 42 now, his hair graying at the temples and his face more weathered from years of working outdoors. But he was still strong and vital, still the solid, dependable man she had married all those years ago. You ever regret it? Tessa asked. Taking on a pregnant woman and her baby, changing your whole life for people you did not even know. Isaac turned to look at her, his expression serious. Not for a single moment, not even once. You and the children are the best thing that ever happened to me, Tessa. Every sacrifice, every challenge, every difficult moment has been worth it 1,000 times over. He reached out and cupped her face in his hand, his thumb stroking gently across her cheekbone. I told you once that I loved you, do you remember, that night after the rustlers came? But I do not think I truly understood the depth of what I felt then. Now, after 15 years of marriage and 6 children and countless days of building a life together, I finally understand what love really means. It means choosing you every single day. It means working together to build something bigger than ourselves. It means loving our children with everything we have and teaching them to be good people. That is what love is, and I thank God every day that He brought you into my life. Tessa felt tears streaming down her face, but they were happy tears. I love you too, Isaac, more than I ever thought possible. You took me in when I had nothing, when I was abandoned and alone and terrified. You gave me your name, your protection, and your love. You called Thomas your son when he was just hours old, and you have been the most wonderful father to all of our children. You made me believe in love again when I thought I never would." Isaac leaned in and kissed her, a kiss that held 15 years of shared history and deep, abiding love. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling through their tears. "Come on," Isaac said, standing and pulling Tessa to her feet. "Let us check on the children one more time before we turn in." They walked through the house together, looking in on each of their sleeping children. Thomas in his room, already almost a man but still their little boy. Catherine, peaceful in sleep even though she was a whirlwind when awake. The twins, Samuel and Matthew, sprawled in their shared bed. Grace, clutching her favorite doll. And Daniel, the baby, thumb in his mouth and looking angelic. "6 beautiful children," Isaac whispered, his arm around Tessa's waist. "6 perfect gifts." "7, Tessa corrected softly. "Do not forget Catherine, your first love. She is part of our family too in spirit, and she would be so proud of the man you have become and the family we have built." Isaac's eyes glistened with emotion. "Thank you for understanding that," he said. "Thank you for letting her memory be part of our lives without feeling threatened by it." "She was your past," Tessa said simply. "I am your present and your future. There is room for both." As the years continued to pass, the Fisher family became well known and respected in Rawhide and the surrounding area. Isaac expanded the ranch significantly, eventually owning one of the largest spreads in the county. But despite their growing prosperity, the family remained down to earth and generous, always willing to help neighbors in need. Thomas eventually took over primary management of the ranch, allowing Isaac to slow down a bit as he entered his 50s. The other children pursued their own interests as they grew. Catherine became a teacher, just like Isaac's first love had been. Samuel and Matthew went into business together, opening a successful general store in town. Grace married a rancher from the next county over, and Daniel followed in Thomas's footsteps on the family ranch. As each child married and started families of their own, Isaac and Tessa found themselves becoming grandparents many times over. Their house, which had once been filled with the sounds of children playing, now filled with the sounds of grandchildren during holidays and family gatherings. One evening in the spring of 1905, Isaac and Tessa sat on their porch watching the sunset, just as they had done countless times over the past 27 years. They were both in their early 50s now, their hair more gray than dark, their faces lined with the passage of time. But when they looked at each other, they still saw the young man and woman who had met at a train depot so long ago. "I have been thinking," Isaac said, reaching for Tessa's hand, "about that day, the day I saw you at the depot and decided to help. What about it?" Tessa asked, intertwining her fingers with his. "I used to tell myself that I helped you out of duty because it was the right thing to do, and I told myself that I proposed to you because I wanted to be a good Christian and do the honorable thing. But looking back now, I think I knew even then. I think some part of me recognized that you were meant to be mine, that Thomas was meant to be my son, that we were meant to build this life together." Tessa smiled, squeezing his hand. "Perhaps you are right. Perhaps it was always meant to be this way. Michael abandoning me was the worst thing that ever happened to me, but it led me to you, and I would not change a single thing about how our life has turned out." "Neither would I," Isaac agreed. "We have 6 beautiful children, 17 grandchildren at last count, a successful ranch, and more love than I ever dared to hope for. We have built something remarkable together, Tessa, something that will last long after we are gone. Our children," Tessa said softly. "And their children, and their children after that. Our love, our family will continue on through them. That is our legacy." Isaac pulled her close, and they sat together in comfortable silence as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the Wyoming sky in shades of purple and gold. The ranch spread out before them, the fruits of decades of hard work and dedication. The house behind them held the memories of countless family dinners, birthday celebrations, Christmas mornings, and quiet evenings by the fire. It had all started with a moment of compassion at a train depot, a cowboy who saw a pregnant woman in need and decided to help. But it had become so much more than that. It had become a love story for the ages, proof that the best relationships are built not on fleeting passion but on commitment, respect, and choosing each other every single day. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Isaac stood and offered his hand to Tessa. "Come, my dear. It is getting cold out here. Let us go inside." Tessa took his hand and let him help her to her feet, a gesture he had repeated countless times over the past 27 years, but it never felt routine or automatic. Every time Isaac took her hand, she felt the same rush of warmth and security that she had felt that very first day when he had helped her into the shade at the depot. They walked into the house together, closing the door behind them on another day in their remarkable life. The fire was burning low in the hearth, casting a warm glow over the room. Pictures of their children and grandchildren lined the mantel, a testament to the family they had created together. "You remember that first night?" Isaac asked as they prepared for bed. "When we brought Thomas home from Dr. Moss's office?" "Of course," Tessa said with a smile. "You had just finished making his cradle and you were so nervous about whether I would like it." "I was nervous about everything," Isaac admitted. "I had just married a woman I barely knew, suddenly had a newborn baby to help care for, and I had no idea if I was doing the right thing. But then I would look at you, at the way you cared for Thomas with such tenderness despite everything you had been through, and I knew it was right." Tessa crossed the room and wrapped her arms around him. "It was right. It was always right. You gave me and Thomas a home, but we gave you something too. We gave you back your dream of having a family. We gave you a purpose beyond just the ranch." "You gave me everything," Isaac said, holding her close. "Everything that matters." They climbed into bed together, the same bed they had shared for 27 years. The mattress had been replaced a few times, and the quilt was new, but it was still their bed in their room, in the house they had built together. As Tessa settled against Isaac's chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, she thought about the long, winding road that had brought her here. The heartbreak of her father's rejection, the terror of Michael's abandonment, the pain of childbirth alone in a strange place. But all of it had led her to Isaac, to this life, to this love. "I would do it all again," she whispered into the darkness. "Every hard moment, every tear, every fear. I would do it all again if it meant ending up here with you." Isaac's arms tightened around her. "As would I, my love, as would I." And so the years continued to pass, each one adding new memories to their collection, new stories to tell their grandchildren, new proof that true love is not always found in dramatic declarations or grand gestures. Sometimes true love is found in a moment of kindness at a train depot. Sometimes it is built slowly, day by day, through small acts of caring and commitment. Sometimes it grows from the most unlikely beginnings into something beautiful and lasting. The Fisher family continued to thrive and grow. Thomas married and had children of his own, eventually taking over the ranch completely as Isaac retired. Catherine's children grew up and became teachers themselves, carrying on the legacy she had created. The twins' business expanded into multiple locations, making them quite prosperous. Grace's ranch flourished under her husband's management and her artistic vision for the property. And Daniel, the baby of the family, surprised everyone by becoming a doctor, inspired by Dr. Moss, who had delivered him and his siblings. Through it all, Isaac and Tessa remained at the center of the family, the foundation upon which everything else was built. Their love story became family legend, told and retold to children and grandchildren as an example of what real love looks like. The story of how Grandpa Isaac had found Grandma Tessa abandoned and pregnant at the depot, and had immediately known what he had to do. The story of how they had built their life together from nothing, through hard work and determination, and unwavering commitment to each other. As they entered their 60s and then their 70s, Isaac and Tessa slowed down considerably. The ranch was in Thomas's capable hands, and they were able to simply enjoy their golden years together. They spent their days sitting on the porch, taking slow walks around the property and visiting with their ever-growing family. One day in the late summer of 1915, when Isaac was 72 and Tessa was 67, they decided to take a trip into Rawhide. It had been a while since they had been to town, and they wanted to see how much it had grown and changed over the years. As their grandson drove them into town in his newfangled automobile, Isaac and Tessa held hands in the back seat, watching the familiar landscape roll by. So much had changed in the nearly 4 decades since they had met. The wild frontier of their youth had been tamed, Wyoming had become a state, and modern conveniences were making life easier in ways they could never have imagined. But some things remained constant. The mountains still rose majestically in the distance. The sky was still impossibly blue and vast, and their love for each other was still as strong as ever. "Look," Tessa said suddenly, pointing. "There is the depot where we met." The wooden platform looked much the same as it had all those years ago, though it had been expanded and improved. A new station house stood where the old one had been, but the basic structure was recognizable. "Stop here," Isaac told his grandson. "I want to get out for a moment." With help from the young man, Isaac and Tessa walked slowly onto the platform where their story had begun. They stood there hand in hand, remembering that August day in 1878 when their lives had changed forever. "Right there," Tessa said, pointing to a spot near the station house. "That is where I was standing when you first spoke to me." "And I was over there," Isaac said, indicating the post where he had been leaning. "I remember seeing you and thinking you looked lost and scared, and then I saw you were with child and I knew I had to help." "You did more than help," Tessa said softly, turning to face him. "You saved me. You gave me a life I never could have imagined. 6 beautiful children, 17 grandchildren, 23 great-grandchildren at last count, and a love that has lasted nearly 40 years. How did I get so lucky?" "We both got lucky," Isaac said, reaching up to touch her face with trembling, age-spotted hands. "That day was the beginning of everything good in my life. You, our children, our grandchildren, all of it started right here on this platform. This is where our family began." They stood there for a long moment, 2 elderly people holding hands on a train platform, surrounded by the memories of who they had been and the life they had built. Then Tessa leaned up and kissed Isaac gently, a sweet kiss that held all the love and devotion of nearly 4 decades of marriage. "Thank you," she whispered against his lips, "for everything." "Thank you," Isaac replied, "for saying yes, for taking a chance on a stranger who had nothing to offer but his name and his promise to take care of you and Thomas, for building this incredible life with me." Their grandson drove them home as the sun began to set, painting the Wyoming sky in those familiar shades of gold and purple. Isaac and Tessa sat close together in the back seat, watching their land roll by, feeling the deep contentment that comes from a life well lived. That evening, surrounded by 3 generations of their family who had gathered for Sunday dinner as they did every week, Isaac stood to make a toast. He was not one for long speeches, but he felt compelled to say something. "I want to thank you all for being here," he began, his voice still strong despite his age. "Looking around this room at all of you, at the family we have built, I am overwhelmed with gratitude. Your grandmother and I started with nothing but hope and determination, and look what we have created. All of you and your children and their children. That is our legacy, and we could not be prouder." He turned to Tessa, his eyes shining with emotion. "And I want to thank my wife, my partner, my love. Tessa, you have been the greatest blessing of my life. You took a chance on me all those years ago, and you have never once made me regret it. Every day with you has been a gift, and I thank God for bringing you into my life." There was not a dry eye in the room as the family toasted to Isaac and Tessa, to their love, and to the family they had created. Later, after everyone had gone home and they were alone again, Isaac and Tessa sat on their porch one last time, watching the stars emerge in the night sky. "That was beautiful, what you said at dinner," Tessa said, leaning against his shoulder. "It was the truth," Isaac replied simply. "Every word of it." They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes from decades of being together. Finally, as the night grew cold and they prepared to go inside, Isaac turned to Tessa one more time. "I love you, Tessa Fisher. I have loved you from the moment I saw you on that depot platform, and I will love you for all eternity." "And I love you, Isaac Fisher," Tessa replied, tears streaming down her face. "You are, and always will be, the best thing that ever happened to me." They walked inside together, hand in hand, closing the door on another day in their remarkable life. And though they could not know it then, they had many more days ahead of them, many more sunsets to watch together, many more family dinners to host, and many more opportunities to demonstrate to their children and grandchildren what true love really looks like. The story of Isaac and Tessa Fisher became legend in Rawhide, passed down through generations as an example of the best of the Old West. Not the violence or lawlessness that often characterized frontier life, but the kindness, the generosity, and the willingness to help a stranger in need. Their story proved that family is not just about blood, but about love and commitment and choosing each other every single day. And it all started with a pregnant woman abandoned at a depot, and a childless cowboy who called her baby his own.